Okay, so in this video what we're going to do is we are going to add some salt and sand, mix them together, and then we're going to try to separate them. The idea behind this lab is that mixtures can be separated using the physical properties of the two things that you mix together. So we do know that salt will dissolve in water, whereas sand does not dissolve in water. So we're going to use that property of water to be able to be dissolved in water to separate sand and salt once they've been mixed. So let's tread along and let's see how this lab is done. Okay, so let's get started. We have two beakers here. This first beaker contains salt. This is the same salt that you put in your food, sodium chloride. And then in this beaker I have some salt, some sand, which would be the same sand that you would find on a beach. So the first thing that we need to do is find how much salt do we have and how much sand do we have. So what we do is we take a piece of paper and we put it on this digital balance, and this digital balance has a very interesting feature. There is a key here which is called the tare key. So when I press this tare key, you will see that the display will turn to 0, and this way when I pour the salt on it, then I will be getting just the mass of the salt, and you can see that the mass of the salt is 10.21 grams. So please make sure that you record this somewhere. Mass of salt is 10.21 grams. Now let's get the mass of the sand. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of paper here, and the reading already is 0, so I don't need to do anything. If it does change to something else, all I need to do is press tare and it would get reset to 0. So let's now pour the sand on top of this paper. So, and now the mass of the sand is we'll take that as 12.00 or 11.99. So let's just take it as 12.0 grams. So I'm going to write this down on a piece of paper. So we got the mass of the salt and the mass of the sand. So the next thing we're going to do is we are just going to mix the two together. Remember, we are intentionally mixing them together. Be careful that all of the salt and all of the sand goes into the beaker. We do not want to miss anything. So there we have our salt and sand, and give them a good shake. So now the sand and the salt are completely mixed with each other, and in order to separate them, the first thing that I need to do is pour in some water. And once I pour the water in, then please don't put a lot of water in. I put in about 140 ml. I will actually need to put more water in later. So initially do not put in a lot of water. And now all I'm going to do is shake this around so that all the salt gets dissolved in the water. So just move it around, and then you would have the salt get all dissolved into water. So the next process we're going to do is called filtration. So we take a filter paper, fold it in half, and then fold it in quarters. So you folded it in half twice, and then you can form a kind of a cone out of it. So this cone will have one layer of filter paper on one side, and it will have 3 layers on the other side. Then you're going to neatly snuggle this cone into the funnel, and then here's our mixture, which contains salt and sand, and the salt is dissolved into water. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to dump all of this into the funnel, which has the filter paper. So the filter paper will let the water and the salt to go through, while it will stop the sand. So we pour this in slowly, making sure that nothing gets spilled outside. And all the while, make sure that you are shaking the mixture so that all the sand and all the salt will go out and nothing would be left inside the beaker. Okay, so here is another interesting piece of apparatus that you can use in the chemistry lab. It's called the wash bottle. It has a nozzle and it's filled with water. So what you would do next is you would make sure that all the sand comes out of the beaker. So you're going to hold the bottle, the wash bottle upside down, and as you squirt the water into the beaker, you can make sure that all of the sand is washed out of it. So remember, I said earlier, do not put in a lot of water in the beaker to start off, because later on you're going to need to put some more. So just making sure that all of the sand has washed out of this beaker and into the funnel. So when the water stops dropping out of the funnel, then you're going to take your wash bottle once more and you're going to just wash the sand that's inside the filter paper, and the purpose is to make sure that all of the sand is free of the salt. So if there is any salt inside that sand left, then this washing is going to make sure that the remaining salt, if there is any, will all be washed out of the sand. So you might want to do this washing a couple of times, because with this you're going to ensure that all of the salt goes out of the sand and into the beaker at the bottom. So again, once the water starts dripping, then I will come back and I will wash the sand once more. Okay, so the water has stopped dripping out of the funnel. So as I can see, there's no more water coming out of the funnel. I'm just going to leave the funnel in the stand here, and I'm going to leave it overnight. And what's going to happen in the meanwhile is that the sand will get dry. And I'm going to take this beaker, which now has the water and the salt dissolved in it, and I'm going to evaporate all the water, and that's going to leave behind my salt. So we have our hot plate here, which is plugged in, and it is set to high. So this will get hot, and on top of it I will place my beaker, and then I'm going to leave that beaker here, and as the hot plate gets more hot, the water start to going to boil, and then ultimately all the water will evaporate and it will leave behind just the salt. And then I'm going to collect the salt and get the mass of that salt and see how much of the salt I actually recovered. So I'm going to leave it here for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and check in on it. So the beaker has been on the hot plate for about 10 minutes, and I don't know if you can see, but I can see that steam is now coming out of the beaker, and that shows that the water is actually heating up. So very soon this water is going to start boiling, and we're going to leave it alone and then come back to it in about 10 minutes. You can now see that the water is actively boiling. If I bring it closer, you can see that the bubbles are forming inside the water. So the water is boiling. So soon enough, what we will find is that all of the water would evaporate, and once all the water is evaporated, then we would have just salt left in the beaker. Okay, so now all the water has evaporated. So I'm going to take a spatula, and with that spatula I'm just going to kind of scrape this salt together, and you can see that I have a whole bunch of this salt which was dissolved in the water. So I'm going to just let it sit here in the lab for 24 hours, and then I'm going to come back to it, and then I'm going to weigh. So why do I want to leave it in the lab for 24 hours? So that any water which may still be inside the salt would evaporate over the next 24 hours. So I'm just going to leave it here, let it sit in the lab and let it dry. So I'm going to come back to this tomorrow morning. So we are back here next day. We're looking at this salt, and you can see that the salt is completely dry. All of the water has evaporated. And then also you can see that the sand which I had left here in the lab has completely dried out. So what we're going to do next is we're going to find out the masses of the salt and sand that we were able to recover. Okay, so let's grab our balance. So here's our balance, and we're gonna put the balance right here and turn it on, so making sure that you are able to see the reading on the balance. So here's our balance. Let's turn it on, and as soon as it turns on, what I'm going to do is I am going to place an empty beaker on top. So as soon as I put my empty beaker on top, then I know that I have to hit tare to make that reading go to 0. So it's been reset to 0, and now I'm going to very carefully pour out all of that sand into the beaker. So this is the salt. So all that salt which had dried out, all the water has evaporated, and I am just making sure that all the salt gets into that beaker. Okay, so the salt has come into the beaker, and how much salt did I get back after my experiment? So the reading right now is 10.01 grams. So this is the mass of the salt which was recovered, 10.01 grams. I'm going to put this aside. I'm going to bring in another beaker. I'm going to put that beaker on top, and again I'm going to hit tare so that it gets reset to 0. So reset it to 0, and then I'm going to take my sand, and then I'm going to pour that sand carefully into the beaker, making sure that none of it spills out. So there's the sand, goes right into the beaker. Okay, and now I can take the reading, and the reading on the meter right now is 11.90 grams. So of the sand that I put into my mixture, I have recovered 11.90. So now you can go ahead and calculate the percent of salt and sand which was recovered, and you should be able to complete your lab.